Welcome back, y'all, to another episode of Why Y'all Working. I'm your co-host, Michael Ogusanya,
I'm Alert Jameson.
and we got the amazing Sheena Franklin here. Say what's up to the people.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
So, Sheena, welcome to Voices. This has been an amazing opportunity, a series to where we've been interviewing some of the leaders as it comes to marketing, health, data, and AI. And it's amazing to have, you're one of the few guests that we've had that really focus on health and health disparities, how we can think of representing ourselves within a larger multi-trillion dollar healthcare system. You are the CEO of Kept Health, as well as leading another venture to where you work with large corporations focused on addressing some of those health inequalities. I can't wait to get into your story, your passion. Congratulations on the TEDx talk. That looked amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. And we connected through Techstars as well. So you've done the work. But most importantly, Sheena, first question is, what does your voice mean to you?
What does my voice mean to me? Oh my gosh. I would probably say freedom, right? Like once you're able to hone what your voice is, it gives you a little more freedom and peace. But also at the same time, depending on what space you're in, it comes with responsibility. So I would say those three things.
Absolutely. And so, is DC home for you? Are you a DC native? I was a transplant.
So Virginia is home for me now, but I'm born and raised in Denver, Colorado. And then I went to school in Atlanta, and then I moved up to the DC, Virginia area.
And so tell us a little bit more about how you found your voice, kind of traveling from one place to another. You grew up in Denver, Colorado, high school, college. Kind of let's talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
your.
So Denver, Colorado, like I said, born and raised. I would probably say when I was prepping for this talk, I was thinking about like my voice. And I would definitely say my voice has probably been honed since I was a little girl. So my mom always gave me the space to voice my opinion, right? As long as it wasn't disrespectful. So like that, I think is the thorough line through college, right? And so like going to HBCU allowed me to hone my voice on like what really was Sheena's Franklin's voice versus what is Sheena Franklin as a Black woman's perspective inside of a bigger institution, right? And I went to school in Atlanta, and then I moved up to DC, right? And there were some things that I was able to experience in school that allowed me to hone my voice. And I'm thinking of an example of a professor, and we had to do like these presentations, right? And it was like snowing in Atlanta, like one of these rare like ice storms, and he wanted everybody like to dress up. So of course that also meant like the young ladies in the class had to wear a dress. And I was like, yo, I'm not. It's icy. I'm not doing that. Like I'm from Colorado. Like I know how this is gonna happen. I'm not doing that. And so I remember when we got there, he was like, I'm not going to give you like a good grade because you didn't follow all the directions. I'm like, you can't do that. I'm not going to freeze just to get to the class. Right. And that was another opportunity where it was like, I'm going to use my voice to speak up differently, which leads me to being more of a contrarian in my space today.
And let's talk about a little bit more about your space. Could you share the industry at large that you're impacting?
Yeah, so I would definitely say healthcare, right? And you bundle that down more into health tech, medical devices, but then even there, I really specialize in data and also where I have the special interest in women's health, not necessarily femtech, but women's health and data and how do we change, right? And so it's calling out the elephant in the room when we have conversations about the impacts, the power of AI. But if we don't address the underlying problem with data, we're just going to scale all these discrepancies, and we're going to see more, not just lower health outcomes. We're going to have more, I would say, lawsuits, more harm done to people, right? Those are things that we're not talking about.
Absolutely. And maybe I could do a high level here. Maybe I can pitch for you just so that the audience knows. Again, you're looking at, how AI is taking over healthcare, how you can take a picture of maybe a rash and then you'll be recommended the right steroid or treatment. You can take pictures of your eyes and be able to start looking at potential precursors to like long-term issues. Your company and a lot of your work is focused on how those models are biased towards people of color, people of different African descent, people across the entire spectrum. You're focused on addressing a lot of inequality as it comes to AI models using, machine learning and computer vision to identify potential health issues?
So a little bit, right? I think that's where we started with the company. And then and we were focused on women, right? So the more we went down the rabbit hole, the more we just found out there's this issue with data. So a lot of times what I do now, just meeting the need of, your customers, right? So we're meeting folks who have data, but they're not understanding how their data is misrepresenting women, right? Or they don't have enough data that includes women. So like that's kind of where we are with Kept Health, and then trying to, I would say, be the largest database of women's health data. Like that's kind of where we are at this point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how do you feel like your voice makes an impact in women's health data, the gathering and the cultivating of it?
Yeah, yeah. So it's one of these things where we talk about like women's health, or we talk about disparities in care and healthcare, right? We talk about it at nauseum, right? Every conference, everybody has a post every day. But the reality is that doesn't rise to the top of like their critical initiatives and companies, right? So if you're at a big company, you have 3 or 5 things you're going to focus on. Women's health, disparities of care, they really don't make it to the top 3. So like that's what I'm saying is like what is it going to have to take in order for us to take this seriously? If we're looking at different wearables that we have, working with a company that I work with, you're not even calibrating this for women. So technically, the results that I'm getting as a woman is probably not even as accurate as a man. And I guarantee you, if I took that to a doctor, those numbers would be vastly different. Right. So, like, that's kind of where we are. And so I'm like saying the quiet part out loud, like being the contrarian.
Okay. We appreciate that. And so, could you tell us a little bit more about those early experiences on what shaped, I guess, your voice throughout building your company, but also let's, even go further back to college and elementary, as you said, that your mother kind of helped you hone your voice and how you kind of the tone in which that you speak to people. How has that helped really help you find your voice in the way that you support and, go to bat for your customers at large today?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's so I talked about growing up and college, and then you get into the workforce, right? And I think I had some really good female bosses, like very early on, who were able to say, Sheena, you have to be more assertive, or, like you have to speak up, like just really pushing me to share what I was thinking. And then even if I did share something, and if it was, you're 22, 23, 24, you're going to say something that's like, okay. So it was just like not criticizing me, not penalizing me for it, but like instructing me, like, this is what you should look at, go off and research this. Maybe that'll change your opinion. But if not, then you can still hold true to that opinion. So that's really helped me a lot.
And so, when did you find that, it was more beneficial to you to share your voice publicly, quietly, or, in spaces where, you could make waves? What was that like for you? How did you start doing that? And how did you start, speaking up for those who didn't have that kind of data or just in general, who didn't have anything to kind of support themselves with?
Yeah, I don't know if it was like one particular moment in time, but like I said, I always was that person, even in school or college, school meaning like elementary school, junior high, high school. I was always that person that was like, this isn't right. Like I was that kid, like in class, this isn't right. This isn't fair. Right. Like that was me. Where like on the report card, it was like Sheena talks too much. Sheena thinks she runs a class. Sheena thinks she's, the class president to help everybody else. Like that's who I was, but like no one ever squashed it. It was just like, how do we hone it so it doesn't be disrespectful or get you in trouble? Like that's kind of the guardrails that I had, which I think I'm very fortunate to have had that.
Okay, and so with that, I'm assuming you've had to soften, sharpen, or refine your tone and the way that you speak. What was that
Mm-hmm.
like for you, and how do you feel like it's grown or changed over time as you've kind of grown in your career and in the industry space that you operate in today? And what does that mean for the people that you impact on the day to day, and how you kind of show up for them through using your voice on a wide scale?
Yeah, I think there was a period of time, I would say, working in corporate America is probably not the best place for someone like me, right? And so you go through these different experiences in there where I would say I actually lost my voice. And it wasn't losing my voice because I wouldn't say I lost my voice, but it just got tempered down. And I probably tempered it down because there's a lot of backlash that you get, right? For just being someone who's outspoken, but being, a black woman who's outspoken, there's different nuances that you have to shape. And I think when you're like pushed back on so much, you kind of just like damper that, right? Until you get to a point where it's like, okay, I can't take this anymore. I'm still going to be an advocate for myself. And then how do I remove myself from the situation and step into a role where I call it more like I'm an advocate, like that's Sheena Franklin. Like if there's one word to describe me, it would be advocate. And I just try to be an advocate in different avenues of my life. And so that means, asking the tough questions or like I said before, saying the quiet part out loud.
All right. And I appreciate you mentioning that. I think that like being an advocate means so many different things, right? I think that, and especially for your lived experience, being a Black woman who's very outspoken and very passionate about the things that she cares about, I think that it's important to note that, there's a lot of things you have to go through, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily get handed or you get labeled before you even speak sometimes. And I think that that sucks for a lot of us,
Mm-hmm.
especially just a lot of different, multicultural people in general, because there's a label that's placed on us before we walk into a room, before we even use our voice, and before we even say what means or can move a lot of different
Right.
people. And so, one of my questions for you would be, what is a common misunderstanding that you are constantly faced with as a Black woman in today's day where you are using your voice? I know you mentioned corporate America, and I'm wondering if you're still in corporate America or you deal
No,
with
no,
people in
no,
corporate America. Okay, so
no.
let's talk about that and how your transition from being in corporate to coming out of corporate and refining excuse me your voice once you did that and made that change.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I moved into, I would say, startup world, which I've come to learn is a little bit different than the entrepreneurship world, right? There's some nuances that make it different. And so now I'm moving into that space, and they still probably weren't used to someone coming into this space saying, yeah, I don't know if that's the best thing for my company, right? And so I won't get into much detail, but I'm definitely not a fan of the saying like, is a founder coachable? Like that's so layered. There's creates an immediate imbalance. And where you have someone who's like me, who's like, first off, no, right? I'm coming from corporate America. I'm not doing this anymore. And I'm not like a 20-year-old or 30-year-old woman. I'm like on this side of it, right? So there's like that where it's like, yeah, no. So like, that was interesting, right? Like finding that pathway as well. But at the end of the day, what drove me to keep my voice was the ultimate mission that I had, right? So that's just really what it was.
Absolutely. And so, like, with this mission, like along the way, what were some examples of like people that have benefited from your voice? Whether people didn't understand what you're doing until the time came. Again, you were doing this since like 2019, 2020, way before
Mm-hmm.
GPTs became a big thing. Kind of, what are some of the wins and moments where people acknowledged your voices? Is speaking for something bigger than you.
Yeah, so I think it's really awesome when I hear women who, or even like stories from like my mom who tells people, I'll give examples. My mom has started to play tennis again, and she has some of the ladies in the group. She was like, one of the ladies said, I keep taking aspirin like all the time, and I feel like it's not working. My mom was like, oh, well, this is why, because my daughter has a women's health tech company, and she looks at research, and aspirin was never tested on women to actually benefit women. So it takes a significantly longer amount of time to get through your bloodstream, even if it does. So it was like instances like that I like, or when someone comes to me and says, I heard on a podcast or I saw your TED talk and I went to my doctor and it was like, hey, you have to tell me what the data says because I know that maybe this wasn't for me, right? Or, I think I have a heart problem and I know women, aren't, again, they don't have the same heart symptoms as men. So like those are the things that I like, right? Like where it's like taking this big concept or problem in the industry and you're actually seeing women starting to incorporate it in their own lives. So, even though I like talking about data and AI, but it's like those are the real wins, right?
And Michael, you're muted again. but I'll take this one. It's fine. So throughout this, right, I wanna ask you, outside of you refining your voice, right, and coming out into the startup world, can you define for us what the difference is between that and what you came from versus the entrepreneurship side of things? I know when you mentioned trying to break down, is a founder coachable, and
Mm,
that being very layered. Can you explain what you mean by that to
sure.
our audience and what that kind of means to you and how you kind of navigate that space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was in corporate America, right, like when you're there, you don't have a strong sense of autonomy, right? Like, and you have to walk such a fine line, right? And so, like, instead of speaking up in a meeting when you want to or when you should, you're like, if I speak up, then this coworker might get upset or go talk to the boss, and now I have to deal with this, and then I might lose my job. And what happens? Like, so it's like all these different things. And so then when you move out of that space and you move into the startup world, it's more or less like I still have autonomy and I can speak my voice, but other people are trying to put you into a box in order for go where they want you to go. And when I talk about being coachable, I think there's a difference between being advisable and being coachable, right? Like, I'm not saying I'm MJ or LeBron or anything, but what I'm saying is they have a coach, right? But that's more an advisor once you get to the NBA. Because once you get to the NBA, they already assume you know the fundamentals, right? Like, or even if you've gone through college or, LeBron didn't, you have enough experience in the early stages of what like winning and failing looks like and competing and knowing how to talk to people and how people should talk to you. But when you are coached, someone is automatically assuming you're lesser than them, right? And you need them in order to make decisions. And if you are someone who knows their voice, maybe they lost it, they're refining it, things become very condescending really quick, right? And I think a lot of founders, specifically Black founders, end up in situations where they feel that they have made the wrong decision, right? And their company is no longer their company because they were trying to be coachable, right? Like, and I say, like, in what world would your banker expect to be your coach? Like, you're just trying to get me to do what you want so you can control your money, right? But in this world, it's not. And now you're like, you're not coachable. You don't listen, you know,
And we
type
don't need
thing.
to talk it details, but yeah, I definitely we went through like similar, ups and downs, and mentorship madness, and how much you have to deal with like different conversations. And then
Mm-hmm.
you look at your Trello, you look at your product roadmap, and it's not like things are getting done. Emails are still getting not replied to. Sometimes, I mean, and that's a real thing. We've heard it a ton, especially Black women founders are the most over mentored and underfunded. It's
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous how people can think that offering a 30-minute call without any intros can be like, no, I helped them. They just didn't want to listen. Like, what does that
Yep.
mean?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So I'd love to think about the people, again, listening, people who want to grow in this space. How would you advocate or how would you advise people that want to start growing their voice in this space as it applies to women's health, AI, and just founder entrepreneurship as a whole?
Yeah, like, I'm probably a little bit different because I'm a creature of my former industry, right? And it was all about purposeful networking, right? So being a lobbyist, networking is your job, right? You're going to refine it so much to your own personality, but the core of that is just joining associations, joining groups, where the decisions are being made, right? And going in with the understanding that I may not be the co-chair today or next year, right? You're just going in right now to learn, to soak up, join a committee, join, whatever's going on and start to share your voice that way. And you'll get more and more comfortable with not just sharing your voice, but people pushing back against you who may not necessarily agree with you. And how do you do it diplomatically to say, well, I think this is better? That's what I would say. The one thing. And I feel like a lot of founders don't look at join associations. They're just always trying to join, I don't know, which makes sense, accelerators and incubators because you need money. But you also want to be like an expert in that industry or someone very, very knowledgeable in your industry.
Absolutely. I feel like a lot of us Gen Z were very stubborn. Like we want that like immediate gratification, Even me, I'm learning like, to be an expert, it is 10,000 hours, which is 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to ask, we're recording this now, by the time this gets released, there'll be probably another headline about, and we're not going to get too deep into it, but it feels like the walls are closing in for a lot of founders, whether it's talking through and advocating for health for specific groups, down to being an entrepreneur saying, no, I'm building a startup for a certain group of people. How would you describe what it feels like to leverage your voice in an environment that seems like wants to shut down so many voices?
Yeah, I think there's again, going back to, being a healthcare lobbyist for like 20 years before like starting this, like, you fundamentally understand the healthcare industry is not going to want to change, right? And when I say the healthcare industry, which is driven by like insurance companies, right? Health systems, like, they're not going to want to change, right? And you have to figure out, like, we're walking that space of like business and like community awareness and advocacy, which is like very difficult, right? I'm trying to like do this, so okay, you have me stumped because I'm really trying to be diplomatic with what I want to say, right? And so it's one of those things where you have to understand, like, you can't go to the same power structures to give you money, right? Like, it's going to be vastly different, right? And trying to figure out, how do I build this company, but I may have to do it very differently than other people have done before, right? So for myself, for example, I had to step back and I said, okay, like, I can't do VC. Not at this point. It's not worth it. So now I'm going to look at partnerships. Now I'm going to look at different pathways to get to where I need to go, because I still think when we're building in this space, again, myself, for example, women's health, we're probably too early for like the big boys to actually want to take the gamble. Does that make sense? Because at the end of the day, they have to make money. That's it, right? Until the FDA says you have to do X, Y, and Z, or the legislation says you have to make sure you do 1, 2, 3 for these communities, the companies are not going to move that way, right? Or unless we love talking about AI diagnosing or making recommendations, until someone has some level of harm repeatedly, then that's what people are going to move. So it's like, how do you stay afloat knowing that that's going to happen, right?
Absolutely. It's kind of like putting yourself in the center of the issue, putting yourself in the center of the problem, talking to people, engaging with people, all the things that you said, building that community. I
Yeah.
love this.
Yeah, and so with that being said, I want to ask you, speaking about people in the community and them also using their voice to connect with you and how your voice is connecting with them and resonating, who ideally hears themselves reflected in your work? I know you mentioned women and dealing with these different types of health problems and having the lack of data and AI and all these different things, but what is the feedback that you've received from that, or a specific moment where you knew that your voice mattered to those individuals in particular, and has kept you going on the path that you're going today?
I think it was early on, right, where it was just, I would really say it was talking to women, right? And then obviously I can say more so was talking to African American women, just because like there's not a lot of African Americans who build in healthcare. The number is very, very small versus other places, right? And so it's more or less like they felt comfortable enough to share things with me that I know they probably wouldn't share with someone else, right? Like, that's the moment when I was like, okay, like, I'm touching on something really, really personal that goes beyond my solution.
Okay, and could you share a little bit about what that might be for those? I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, like the data gaps and all of that, but what specifically would be, I guess, the secret sauce as to why that you're the person for, them to go to as far as using your voice, and what lived experiences would differ from, you being a Black African American woman versus, somebody that's coming either straight from Africa, for example, Nigeria, Ghana, or, somebody that's from Central South America that may also look like you but
Right,
not
right.
necessarily speak your language.
So I think there's just like culture nuances, right? That we understand that someone else may not understands, right? Because I think, listen, the countries that you listed before, it's predominantly people who look like you, right? But when you come to America, it's different. I have like my best friend's family is from Liberia. Like they will talk about how you had to learn the difference of how to operate, right? So I think it's that part that they resonate with, like, oh, like she's a Black woman, she gets it. There's little things that we say that we don't know that we're saying that people pick up on. And then if I would say like really sets me apart is once people figure out like what my background was, they're like, oh, okay, well, like she used to lobby for Walgreens. Like she understands this, or she told me about this bill. So that gave me a little bit more credibility when I was out talking, right? Or if I tell folks, like right now, I won some awards from major associations about technology and women's health, then they're like, oh yeah, like that adds another layer of like Sheena's not out here playing games, right? So like it's serious. So I think it's all of that like mixed together, like which is all our experiences, right? It's just more than just one thing.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. And so with that, how do you want those people to feel after engaging with your voice in the work that you do today? I know that you mentioned they feel like they can resonate with you. They understand your credibility once you explain to them who you are, what you've been through, what you've done in the past. How do you want them to, receive the work that you do?
Yeah, that's such a great question because it's like they ask you that question, when like you're building your brand, like what are people like doing? And so like I always say, I want to be like your badass best friend. That when you're done talking to me, you're like, oh, I got this. Like, I can take over. And if I don't, I know I can go back to Sheena and she's gonna tell me what to do. And that's just that, right? Like everybody leaves like I can do this. I'm in control.
And so I'm gonna go with our one of our last questions here that I
Mhm.
have. And so beyond the attention, money, recognition, and fame, why do you keep showing up every day and using your
Mm.
voice?
That's such a good question. Someone asked me that last week, right? And like my flippant response was because like I have to. Like what else am I gonna do? Like I gotta eat, right? But like I think beyond that, I'll answer that in two levels, right? One is because you're just innately driven. I think there's something about people who are entrepreneurs, regardless of what you're doing or on what level you do it at. Like there's something that innately that forces you. Like I want to make an impact, or I just want to see my own self win. Like I just want to see that too, right? And I think entrepreneurs, we got a little bit of an ego, right? So we want to see that win and help. But I think I feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Finally, when you find that sweet spot in life, you're like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so on those tough days, it's just like prayer and God gets me through because I know this is where I'm supposed to be going. Even though I know I just cussed, but like take that part out. But like that's really what it is, right? It's that when you find that particular purpose. I hate that word or thing, but purpose. That's what you're supposed to be doing.
Thank you. This has been amazing. There's so many, we'd love to have you back on for another recording to dive deeper into the business, give you the full like why I work and treatment. But for
Yeah.
this, for voices, I feel like you really honed in and were very relatable on how just thinking about being in the middle of your issue, being in the middle of your community, thinking about real stories. Yeah, you won't know how many people who either come up with like a 5 minute pitch and run with it, or people who are looking at other people to like build problems versus kind of finding a real balance and not allowing yourself to be kind of the next yes man or to be the person that listens to a million people and has nothing to show for it. Like you
Yeah.
have shown
And
a
that's hard, right? Especially when you want to do something right. And especially if you're a person who knows I need mentors, right? But then you got to like try to balance that, which is difficult. So,
Absolutely. And so, how can people get in touch with you? I'd love to learn more, especially about the firm as well. You're actively working with larger companies around health data. How can people get in touch with you?
yeah, the best way to find me, talk to me is on LinkedIn, Sheena D. Franklin. Very simple.
Instagram, websites.
No Instagram. I mean, it's there, but it's like not there, right?
You don't use it?
No.
Oh yeah, sounds good.
Right? Like I stalk people on, Instagram and TikTok, but the best way to find me, to communicate with me is LinkedIn.
There you have it, folks. Appreciate it.
Great episode. I'm your co-host, Michael Agusinha.
I'm Malaire J.
We got Sheena Franklin. Say peace to the people.
Peace, everybody.